computer, yes. Welcome to the Book Bungalow's virtual author event featuring Jeffrey J. McKenna, author of an historical YA novel, Saving Dr. Warren, a True Patriot. My name's Tanya Mills, and I'm usually not masked for this, but his phone wasn't working, so we had to get together for this. So I'm the owner and manager of the Book Bungalow in St. George, Utah, Southern Utah's only independent bookstore offering all new books and a full range of events, but our events are virtual for now. Saving Dr. Warren, a True Patriot, is, in my opinion, very timely just now, given the events in our country over the past few weeks. I know we don't have the class joining us yet, but we've got a creative writing class in Hurricane joining us about 12:15, and many of them already have digital copies. But for those of you who might be interested in a physical copy, I'll be posting the link to order this book, but I'll also have some copies here in the bookstore that you can get at a discount. 20% off, and they'll be signed by the author. I'll put the link, though, if you want to order online in the chat room after this. Fortunately for my bookstore, he's close by, so I could get more books because I sold the last copy just the other day. Anyway, I'll be posting also a link to Jeff's website so you can learn more about the book and its availability to schools all over the country. And I'll also be sure to include the book order and website link at the end of our recording before we post it to our YouTube channel this weekend. And you're a regular, Valerie, so you know that I always send a follow-up email with the YouTube link. In case you haven't yet read this fast-paced novel, let me give a brief introduction to the storyline. In this book, Steve Odell, a current-day 8th grader, learns the true meaning of patriotism as he races through history, linking the 1770s patriots with modern war veterans and the heroes of 9/11, all in a rush to save one of America's most forgotten heroes, Dr. Joseph Warren, the man who sent Paul Revere on his midnight ride. The author, Jeff McKenna, is a lawyer who lives here. You live here in St. George? Yeah. And his love for his country has fostered his love for writing. As he's put it, uncovering America's history can be messy, but he dives in with both hands to uncover what lies hidden in our nation's past. He seeks to reveal forgotten heroes and help them come alive for young Americans. I'm going to begin by asking him to read a few pages from his book. And while he reads, I encourage you to post any questions or comments you might have during our discussion in the chat box. I've already received several questions from the creative writing class, which I'll pose to him after I've posed my own. And they focus more on the writing naturally. And anyway, put them in the chat box, and after his reading, I'll begin my interview. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff McKenna. You can take it off.
All right, we'll get our distance. Valerie, great to meet you virtually. I'm excited to be able to share. There's 3 time periods within the novel, Saving Dr. Warren, a True Patriot. The periods are the 9/11. My character, the 14-year-old boy, lives right after 9/11. The experiences that he has with the World War II veteran. And in 2001, there were still a lot of World War II veterans, not nearly as many today, but they were all in their 70s, and there were a lot. And he has an experience with a long lost relative there. So the World War II factors into the book. And then there is the time period of Joseph Warren. And, you know, Valerie, right now we're having kind of a little bit of an intimate, because have you heard of Dr. Joseph Warren before?
Do you want her to unmute?
You know what? You can unmute if you want, Valerie, just because
I just did, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to have that. That's awesome. So you're with 99% of other Americans that have not heard of Dr. Warren, and I had not heard of him 20 years ago. I loved history. I Went to 3 years of law school, 4 years of undergraduate. My wife gave me a book about rebels and redcoats and the American Revolution. And the first chapter talked about Paul Revere sneaking through the streets of Boston, knocking on a door, being brought in, and somebody telling him what to do. And I remember at that time, 20 years ago, thinking, who's telling Paul Revere what to do? Well, it was his best friend, Dr. Joseph Warren. Paul Revere will actually name a child Joseph Warren Revere after his best friend. And if you had told Valerie, if I had told Paul Revere, or if Tanya had told Paul Revere 250 years ago, you're going to be more famous than your mentor and your best friend, Joseph Warren, he would have laughed. More geographical landmarks are named after Joseph Warren than any founding father except George Washington himself. That's how popular he was. Ronald Reagan will quote him, and I can read this here, I guess, at the very end of the book. And where Ronald Reagan, I do an actual provision, the author's final word, basically saying in 1775, Joseph Warren was relevant. It was needed, and our country needed him in the 1770s. He dies at Bunker Hill in 75. I say that in 1980, when Ronald Reagan took office, he was needed. If you recall, in 1980, we had the Iran hostage situation. For 444 days, Americans had been held hostage. President Reagan was taking office when we had this an economy that was a lot of people out of work. And he said these words. He quotes Joseph Warren and he says, "Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of." And think about this in our modern day. Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. It reminds me of the wonderful poem that 22-year-old poet yesterday at the inaugural ceremony shared. Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important questions upon which rest the happiness and liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves. Reagan quoted that, saying, we're Americans. Let's act worthy of ourselves and let's go forward. And that was the message, without quoting Joseph Warren, but that was the message yesterday. And that is the message that I think needs to exist. Act worthy of ourselves, go forward. The story of Dr. Joseph Warren is a story of a patriot that's been forgotten, of a 14-year-old boy in 2001 that has these experiences with this patriot. And he feels like he's having the experiences, of course, to do it all, think that in a time traveling, save Dr. Warren from dying at the Battle of Bunker Hill, then he'll be famous.
Okay.
But the book has a double meaning. We're saving Dr. Warren's memory. So that's kind of a little bit in a nutshell. And, as far as a part to read, I'm going to read the part about patriotism, because I was telling Tanya, there's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism is an amazing, wonderful thing. Yes. Nationalism is what has caused countries to do terrible things. But I love this definition from my my main character, the 14-year-old boy. His best friend is a 14-year-old girl, and together they love to write and they love to read. And this is the beginning of the book. There's an essay contest that these junior high school students that we'll be talking about can participate in it. And in that essay contest, there was a $500 prize. And my main character's whole focus is, what do the judges want to hear to win this? The theme was, what does patriotism mean after 9/11? And everything was, what do they want to hear? What will make me win? And his best friend was kind of like, shouldn't you really be thinking about what patriotism really means? And he's like, oh, what's important is how we write it, not necessarily, these things. And so this is the part where they're doing that. It says here, let me back it up just a little. Remember, The key is we've got to figure out what the judges want to read. He popped a handful of chips into his mouth and he began to scribble down his ideas. Grace tapped the end of her pen up and down, but didn't say anything. Steve was too busy writing to notice her tilt her head and squint her eyes. After a minute, she said, I'm thinking patriotism means other things. I think it's like doing something for others, you know, for the people in your country. Someone isn't patriotic just because they say they are. They need to be doing something. Like the people that gave blood at our school, or like when soldiers go away to fight for our freedom. You said something about Lexington and Concord. Well, I think that's like the feelings of patriotism, like leaving your farm and fighting back then are similar to what people now do. Kind of like regular people giving stuff up, even dying to help others. Like on September 11th, when the people on the one plane made it crash into the field in Pennsylvania so it didn't bomb the White House. It's that kind of patriotism that is the same after September 11th. Steve stared at her. Awesome. I love it. How would you write it for the judges? You have to be thinking about who's going to be reading these essays. I've been studying about writing, and what the experts say is think about your audience. Steve wrote Pearl Harbor on his paper and said, see, Lee Warren, he's sponsoring this contest, right? And he was a Pearl Harbor survivor, right? I'm going to include something about Pearl Harbor because that's what he's going to like reading. He popped another chip into his mouth. For a moment, Grace looked at Steve in silence, and then she asked, is that everything? What the judges will like? Steve smiled. Always think about your audience, what they want to read. And for this essay, it's about the judges. That's how you win. That's how you get the $500. But I totally love your ideas. So what happens, Valerie, is he actually wins. People actually start patting him on the back and telling him what a great patriot he was. Mm-hmm. He just wants to take his $500. He loved writing. He loved reading. But that is what is the impetus throughout the book. He now has these experiences with this relative that was a World War II veteran. He has these experiences with Dr. Joseph Warren. Now, I'm not giving away anything here by sharing. If you see the book, you can see that I am in the back picture. And with that blue glove, I am holding a ball. Okay. That ball is the most famous revolutionary musket ball in the United States, I think in the world. It's held at the New England Genealogical Historical Society in Boston. And it is purportedly the musket ball that killed Joseph Warren at the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Oh, very cool.
They let me hold it. I scheduled in advance and they brought it out. And I think anybody could, Tanya. You go back to Boston, I think they'll let you. But I got to hold it. That musket ball will become a key element of the story. It becomes the time-traveling talisman that connects my 14-year-old boy with these experiences in Boston. And he's struggling because he doesn't know, is this really happening? Am I having these experiences? Are these dreams? He's trying to convince his friends, I really think these are time-traveling experiences, not just dreams. And there's, you know, some junior high drama that exists between his best friend and him with respect to, you know, this dilemma. So
okay, I'm gonna cut in now because we've got our class with us too. And just to explain to them, his phone wasn't working. Our authors, you're still in there, you're still in the picture. Okay, so we're having to wear masks here, although I'll let him take his off for talking. Can you hear us okay, Ms. Weiss? I'm assuming. Okay, I'm gonna begin with my questions, and then she sent me theirs.
Oh, excellent.
So, okay. I know you just talked with Valerie for a bit about patriotism, but again, for the benefit of the class, given the events of what occurred on our nation's capital on January 6th, how would you say your book applies in our day and age? And how can we tell the difference between a patriot and an insurrectionist in these times of great division?
Yeah, I hope Mrs. Weiss's class can hear. It's such a pleasure to get to have middle school students to speak to, because really, Tanya, that's what the book was written for, was for middle school students. I'm going to take this down, but keep a little distance here. The question is excellent. what's the difference? Those that were running through the Capitol, flying flags and holding up their hands as if they were doing something patriotic. It comes down to this. Our country is not founded on people. It's founded on a constitution. And the Constitution has governed our nation for almost 250 years. When we take an oath of office, that oath of office is on that Constitution. And that Constitution is the key. And those that are breaking in to a building, or those that are doing harm or damage to another individual, have violated those rules of law that we hold sacred. They've crossed the line. That's not patriotism. Patriotism is going and expressing a feeling that you feel like needs to be addressed in the government. And our Constitution gives us the right to do that. We have the right to peacefully gather, to peacefully protest, to peacefully state our position. But when we breach the peace, at that point, it's no longer protected action, whether that's storming into the Constitution or that is destroying property. That's not the proper way to voice discontent in the United States of America. And, patriotism is about doing things for others, not hurting others or the country that we live in.
Okay. But this book is written about events that they occurred after or before the Constitution was established?
Great question. These are events that occurred in the 1770s before the Constitution. So these would be the initial events that the Americans were doing when the British were violating their rights, and they were saying, we are entitled to the same rights here in Boston or in New York or in Philadelphia that our English citizens have in Liverpool or London or Manchester. And the problem was they weren't being treated the same, and they were voicing their discontent. And when they did, the king just squashed them with force, with military troops. And they at some point said, there comes a time when a people has to say, you're not going to be the king. And they wanted to create a country that was free, that was democratic, where the people could make their decisions and put people into office. And the people agreed they would follow the rules that were set forth in the Constitution. And that's why every civil officer that takes an oath, when President Biden took his oath yesterday, his oath of office was done saying that he will uphold the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, you don't need to speak that loudly. That's okay. All right. Now, you read the quote already to Valerie, and you've attributed this quote by Dr. Warren, which was in President Reagan's 1980 inaugural address. Was that how you came upon this idea for this book, was coming across that quote? Or if not, what led you to write this book?
That's a great question, Tanya. So there's a really neat quote. This is for all the students that may be listening, that I include at the very, very end of the book. It's actually in an author's note where I'm kind of sharing, a little bit about the importance of this book coming out now in 2020. It was during the pandemic. It was before we had a lot of the civil unrest, but we were in the middle of a pandemic. And I thought to myself, you know what? And I don't know for you kids that are there listening, or I should say students, you students that are there listening, I spent 20 years writing this book. I am real prolific. I crank books out, Tanya. I can get one done every 20 years. That's a joke. 20 years is a long, long time. And it was because I was struggling and trying to make it a fun read for middle school students. I wanted middle school students to enjoy the adventures and the story as much or more than they enjoyed any other aspect of the book. But when it came out here after 20 years, I thought, how appropriate that this book is coming out in a time that's really a hard time for Americans. And I quoted President Reagan from 1980, and that wasn't something that had spurred it, Tanya. I mean, I had come across the President Reagan quote long after I decided to write a book about Joseph Warren. But President Reagan said this, and I want to just quote it for the students. I don't need to read it. I can quote it. He says, "Our nation is in danger, but not to be despaired of." He's quoting Dr. Warren in the 1770s when the English were doing all of these terrible things. Dr. Warren said this to the people in Boston and to all Americans. He said, "Our nation is in danger, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important questions upon which rest the happiness and liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves." And those 4 words, act worthy of yourselves, applied in the 1770s, Tanya. They applied in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan took office. And he says this quote, students, you weren't born, but there was a hostage crisis where 52 American diplomats had been held hostage in Iran for 444 days. And they basically said, we're not scared. We're holding these Americans hostage and we're not going to let them go. The economy was in a terrible recession with millions of Americans out of work. And so our nation was in danger. It did have problems, but President Reagan said, act worthy of yourselves. Just like Dr. Warren had said in the 1770s, act worthy of yourselves. And I think when you watched that inauguration yesterday, students, if you did, that's what President Biden, that's what the others around were saying. They were saying, let's be Americans, let's act worthy of ourselves, and let's be united. So I think the words completely apply. But how I came across writing this book was 20 years ago when my wife gave me a book about the beginnings of the revolution, and Paul Revere was sneaking through the streets to get instructions on his midnight ride, and he knocked on a door. Somebody opened that door, brought him in, and that somebody gave him directions on what he was supposed to do on his ride. And I remember Tanya thinking, who's giving Paul Revere directions around here? Well, it was his best friend, Dr. Joseph Warren. And that started a spark in my mind thinking, how have I never heard of him? And then the more I learned about him, the more I thought, wow, he was involved in everything, and yet he's been forgotten.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, what were your biggest challenges? It took you 20 years, so it must have been challenging. What's the real difficulty when you try to add in fiction with history and without lessening the truth of events?
Oh, that's a great question, Tanya. So the students, I want to make sure, Mrs. Weiss, these students are creative writing students.
Yeah.
Awesome. That means you guys are trying to develop the skills to be able to someday write a book. And I think that is the coolest thing for all of you. I am so excited for you to get to be in this position where you're young and you're learning how to be a creative writer. There's that word creative. See, guys, I went to law school and I knew how to write. I knew where to put a period and I knew how to make a complete sentence. But a book that's written like a legal contract, that's boring. And so the initial time, I wrote it 3 different times and I had to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it to learn to write more creatively like you guys are learning now. So I wish that when I was in 8th grade, 9th grade?
No. What grades? I can't remember. They're in intermediate school.
So it'd probably be 8th grade, maybe 7th grade even. But I wish I had learned the skills that you guys are learning now so that I would have been a better creative writer. So I had to learn those, and I'm so grateful I did. And I feel like the book, you know, we've had a lot of school middle-aged students that have read it, and these were the words initially. Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I think this is going to be boring. And then afterwards, to have them say things like, wow, it was so exciting. And I actually felt like I was there, you know, experiencing the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party and Lexington and Concord and those first battles of the Revolution. And to say, it made me feel more patriotic. That's the good stuff. And that's what creative writing can do, guys. And I really love historical fiction because if it's good historical fiction, then you're enjoying the story and you're having so much fun with the story. But at the same time, you're learning things. And that's what I love about good historical fiction. And I think Dr. Warren, Saving Dr. Warren, A True Patriot, does that. It lets you learn a lot of great stuff about history, but in a fun way.
So did this start out with Steve Odell, the 8th grader, as your protagonist, or did you?
Good question, Tanya. Good question.
Was this always geared to?
It was. I knew at the time, at the time, my kids were kind of getting into that middle school age, my oldest. Now they're all older than that because it took me so long to write it. But at the time, I loved reading children's and I still love children's literature. It's my favorite genre is children's literature. And so I had read, all these different Newbery books to them. And I had read, some of my favorites. In fact, here's a little secret, guys. When you read it, I would love to hear from you when you find the hidden gems of the Newbery authors that I've kind of buried in here. You'll see their names. My main World War II character, this is a hard one, but his name is Harold Keith Warren. He's a descendant of Joseph Warren, but he had dropped the Warren and he hid kind of out as Harold Keith. Harold Keith was the author of Rifles for Waddy, which was a Newbery book about the Civil War that I really loved as a 6th grader. And so I included that. You're going to see a lot of references to Johnny Tremain, which was a Newbery Award-winning book that I read probably a half a dozen times in preparing and doing this. The main author of Johnny Tremain, Esther Forbes, you will see her name come up in different places. You will see references to different characters. In fact, Dr. Warren's horse, here's one more giveaway, and then I won't give you any more. The rest you've got to find on your own. But if you read Johnny Tremain, there's a horse that Johnny Tremain rides, and only he can ride it because it's so wild. And that horse's name is Goblin. See if you can't find a little goblin in this story. But I loved those authors. And so Tanya's question is, did I always have it written for a middle school audience? Did I always have my main character as a 14-year-old boy? Yeah, I did. I wanted it for you guys. I wanted it in a book for middle schoolers.
Okay. Now that you said you spent 20 years writing this, I was going to ask if this was going to become a series, because it's a great platform for a series. Particularly if this same guy and his friend, if they could find other time traveling talismans for other characters in history. So are you?
Tanya's spot on. Yeah, she's leading it at the very, very end of the book. After the author's notes, there's just like 2 or 3 pages, and it's the first chapter of the 2nd book. One of the minor characters here is Curtis Christopher. He's my main character's brother's best buddy, and he will be the main character in the 2nd book, and there will be another time traveling talisman, and it's going to affect him. And I'm in the process of writing it, but as you guys know, I can't take 20 years, or you guys will all be grown up and have kids by then, and I'll probably be close to dead. So we've got to do it a little bit faster than 20 years apiece. I'm hoping that it's going to be 20 months. That's my goal. 20 years to 20 months.
That's good. Okay. All right. All right. Here's some questions from the teacher and her students. I think the first one is from the teacher. What advice do you have for teens who want to be authors?
I love it. I seriously take the class. First advice is take a class like you're taking from Mrs. Weiss. Take a class that's teaching you creative writing. So I think everybody that I'm looking at there out in your audience, I'm like saying, good job. That's the number 1 thing. The number 2 thing is write a lot. Just write a lot. My hero, I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want you to raise your hand. How many of you have read a book that's one of my favorite books? Didn't win the Newbery, but it's one of my favorite books, Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. Yay, I got a few hands that went up. That is my favorite book of all time, and I'm going to share a little bit with you. Wilson Rawls, I've studied him like no other, and I relate to him. He always wanted to be an author, but he didn't know how to write. Now, that's not really me, right? Because I went to law school and I went to college and all of those things. He grew up in the mountains. He grew up just like his main character in the book. And he learned to write with a stick and sand in the river. And he would write in the sand, and he made his dog read or he would read to his dog what it was he was writing. And this is the point I wanted to share with you students. He went to his dad because he wanted to be a writer, but he hadn't had hardly any education. And he went to his dad and he said, "Dad, do you think I can be a writer?" Because he'd come across the book, Call of the Wild, and he loved it. He read it so much, he said the pages would fall apart. And he held the book and he said, "Dad, do you think I can be a writer?" And you know what his dad said? "No, son, that's for educated people. You weren't born and you didn't get education." But he never gave up the dream that he'd be a writer. And whenever he could, he would write. And he would write, and he'd write on like paper bags from the grocery store because he couldn't afford paper. But he would write, and he couldn't spell very well, and he didn't know where to put periods. He didn't know any of that, but he knew he wanted to tell a story. And he knew he wanted to tell a story about the Ozark Mountains that he came from. And anybody that's read Where the Red Fern Grows knows what a powerful story Wilson Rawls told. So I would say to you guys, never give up the dream, and write. And write and write.
Okay. When did you first, they said, what inspired you to write at all? I mean, what makes you want to write? What made you write?
Yeah, that's a good question, because writing is hard for me. I'm better at it now because I've done it and I've redone it, and I've kind of, got a better, my skills are just a lot better. I'm doing what I'm telling you to do. I wrote and wrote and wrote a lot, creative writing. But what inspired me is I wanted to tell Dr. Warren's story. I really did. I wouldn't give up. People would say, well, you can make it into like a children's book. And people would say, well, Jeff, you should really maybe just write short stories, not just a big novel like this, But it never felt right. I always wanted to tell his story. I wanted to make him known to Americans, because him being forgotten, I'm going to share one thing with the class, just so you can know why. One of the things when I'm doing my research and I'm learning all I can about Dr. Warren, Joseph Warren, one of the things I come across is a statement that says more geographical landmarks were named after Joseph Warren than any founding father except George Washington himself. There's more Warrenvilles, Warren counties, Warrentons that were named after him than any other founding father except for George Washington. But he became forgotten. And I just wanted his story told again. He had been so famous in his day. And I just wanted modern day Americans to know it. So that's why I never gave up on my story.
Okay, did you have the whole story planned ahead of time, or did you create as you wrote? Are you an outliner or a pantser?
That's a good question. I don't know if you guys, so outliners, how many of you guys are outliners? Raise your hand if you're an outliner, like you like to have it all outlined before you start writing. Or how many of you guys want to just say, you know what, I think there's something under this ground. I'm just going to start going, and as it comes, it's going to materialize. So Tanya, you're the second. You're not an outliner. And Valerie, I saw you raised your hand. You're an outliner. I would say I'm more of an outliner than I am just coming from the ground, although I'm leaning more now to coming from the ground. But with Dr. Warren, I outlined it a bunch, and then would write it and then would redo it. And, but I tried to lay it all out first.
Okay. How do you stay focused as you write? And what time of day do you write?
Yeah. In fairness, for you students, part of the reason it took me 20 years is, I was just so busy. I have 4 kids. I was a lawyer. I was a soccer coach. I coached over at Snow Canyon High School. Actually, I coached the women's team, and then I coached the men's team when my children were. So I had all these other things going on. So Tanya's question is, when did I write? A lot of times I'd get up at 5 a.m. and I would use some of those hours before I had to go to work and do my other things. My beautiful wife, she would tell you that on every vacation, I was bringing my laptop and I was bringing all of my research. And whenever I could get a break, I was doing something. And So I just, whenever I could get time, and for my birthday, literally for my birthday present would be, I would go to a bed and breakfast and I would stay there for a couple days and do nothing but write.
Yeah. How do you stay focused though? You didn't have a problem staying focused?
Well, once I was in those settings, yeah, I could focus and, you know, work on it.
Okay, all right. It took you 20 years. What was the hardest thing?
The hardest thing, honestly, was just learning to tell a fun story. The first time I submitted my manuscript to a professional editor, she was a friend of a friend's sister, and she was from New York City. I mean, she was the real deal, right? And I can talk a good story. Like, I can get excited and I can be passionate. And I was talking to her on the phone and she was excited. She's like, yes, give it to me. I'm traveling to Europe. I will read it on the plane. I'm excited. Yeah, I'll read this for you. And she, again, she's a professional writer from New York City. So I get it to her. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm telling you guys, this was the hardest blow I took. It was a punch in the gut. She basically said, I could read about 4 or 5 chapters and I had to stop. And let me give you some advice. And then she rattled off some books on writing, and she rattled off some books on, you know, kind of a general area about, like, you know, battle scenes and how to depict those. And basically she said to me, students, you need to learn how to write before you start this again. So it was a real blow. I'm not going to lie. For a while there, I think I may have almost given up, but I kept plugging away.
Did you ever hit writer's block? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Well, everybody will hit writer's block. I mean, how many of you guys, I want to see the students. Raise your hand. How many have had writer's block before? Yeah, I think almost all of your hands are going up, you know. I mean, we all are, you know, and there's just some times where the juices flow and you're like, yeah, I can't keep up with this. This is so, and there's other times where it's like, oh, that stinks. I just spent 2 hours and it just isn't good. Mm-hmm. So we all have that. The only way to overcome it, you know, like Tanya asked, the only way to overcome it is keep doing it. Just keep at it, you know. Don't give up.
So did you always have time travel as an element, as an idea for the book? And how did you focus on, was that because you came across the musket ball? The musket ball?
Gosh, that's a great question, Tanya, because I honestly can't remember exactly, you know, when I decided, because, you know, that is a great question. I knew of the musket ball. I don't know that the students got to see this, but if you get the book and you look on the very back here, I'll hold it up right there. I'm holding a musket ball in my hand. And that musket ball is a real musket ball. That's the most famous musket ball of the American Revolution. And it's in Boston, Massachusetts. And I got to hold it. It's purportedly the musket ball that killed Joseph Warren at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And I knew it existed from way back in my research. When I just started researching about Joseph Warren, I knew that there was this special musket ball that this historical society had had since the early 1800s, and, you know, claimed that it had been the musket ball. So I almost think, you know, almost right from the beginning, I thought that would be cool, because I wanted a modern day teenager like you guys. I wanted that main character to be having the experiences with Dr. Warren. So I think it was pretty early. I thought, you know what, let's use this as my connection between the two.
Okay. You're still writing. So now you're how many chapters in are you on this second book?
Well, my beautiful daughter's helping me. She's actually a U.S. history teacher, and she really helped a lot at the very end of this. For a lot of years, guys, I kept telling her, please read this. And her name was Megan. Please read this. Oh, yeah, Dad, sometime, Dad, sometime, Dad. And then she was doing her student teaching, not this fall, but before that, up by Provo. And she read my manuscript finally. And she said, Dad, this is kind of good. I think my kids might like this. And she said, will you print out manuscripts and I'll let the kids in my class read it, and, you know, I'll tell you what they think. And I was like, really? You bet. And so I did that. And when you guys read the book or you look at it, I dedicated in the beginning, I have all of their names in the acknowledgement. I have all those middle school kids' names listed because they did help me a lot in saying different things. But she's helping me on the second book and we're working it together. Tanya asked how many chapters. We're outlining. We've got a few chapters. I could pull out. No, yeah, it's coming along, but a little bit slow.
Okay. Why do you like writing?
Writing's hard for me. Like, I'm going to ask you guys, because you guys are seriously, you're cool, right? Because you guys are in a creative writing class. I told you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, I wish I could have had a creative writing class. How many of you guys in this class like writing? Raise your hand. How many in this class find writing really hard? Raise your hand. No, that's cool. That's cool. How many of you guys raised your hand on both? Did anybody raise their hand saying, I like writing, but it's really hard for me? Because that would be my category. Like my main character in the book, when you read this book, my main character, this 14-year-old boy, has all these crazy time traveling experiences because he wins an essay contest. Right after 9/11, a great patriot in his town sponsors a $500 essay contest. And it says, what does patriotism mean after 9/11? Well, my main character loved to write and he could just write. So like some of you guys that raised your hand, he was like you and he just like, give me that essay because I'm going to write it. I'm more like the others where it was hard for me to write. I like the end product and I like having something, but it's hard. And I only do it because at the end, I want to create something that I think other people can enjoy and they can learn from. So that's why I do it. Can I put in one plug, Tanya, real quick on this essay contest?
Yeah, I was going to do it at the end, but go ahead now.
Okay. So since we talked about the essay contest, and I know Mrs. Weiss has information for you guys, but that $500 contest that I mentioned in the book, it exists today. We have an essay contest with 3 prizes, one for $500, one for $250, and one for $100. And the essay contest is, what does patriotism mean to you after you read Saving Dr. Warren, a True Patriot? So you read the book, and as you're reading it, you can be thinking, how did it make me more patriotic in my life? Or what parts of the book did I really like? Because those are going to be elements as to who wins $100, who wins $250, but then the grand prize will be just the best essay. Just the best essay.
And the teacher?
Yes, this is exciting for Mrs. Weiss. If you guys win,
if you enter and win,
if you enter the contest and you win, your teacher gets a matching award. So if you win the $500, she can get $500. And if you have 3 winners from your class, that would be, let me do my math, $850. You could bring home $850 to your teacher. That'd be pretty cool.
Okay. Why do you like reading?
I love to read. I love to, for me, reading is about learning. I really like to learn. And as some people just want to read because they just totally want to get caught up in the story. I love that too, don't get me wrong. But that's why I love historical fiction, because I feel like I'm double dipping. If I can get good historical fiction, then I get the good story that I love that gets me, all, excited about a story, and also is teaching me something about an element of history or a person in history or persons in history. So, but I love to read, and I love it that it just transports me into a different, time and in a different, sphere.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, someone in her class wanted to know if Jeffrey McKenna was your real name. And if so, why didn't you use a pen name?
Oh, that's a good question, because I almost did. I came this close. Did any of you say that? Raise your hand if it was one of your questions. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. I'll tell you why I didn't use the pen name. I was going to be Jeffrey James. That's my middle name, Jeffrey James, but it wasn't going to be McKenna. And my wife said, no, you're not. I said, honey, it's not your book. I wrote it. She said, I don't care. I put up with this through 20 years of vacation, through 20 years of you waking up in the morning and waking me up when you turned the light on when you weren't supposed to, or you weren't being as quiet getting out of bed. I put up with a lot of this, and I want it to be your real name for the grandkids.
Oh, yeah.
We have, at that time, we only had one little grandson, but now we have two. And she just said, I want them to know their grandpa wrote the book. So
Oh,
that argument won.
That's good. And how does it feel to see your book in stores and for sale online published?
Well, I don't know who wrote that, but I'm gonna be completely honest here. It almost makes me cry, honestly. It truly, after 20 years of working on it, when I first saw it come in a hardbound book like this, and I could hold it, I've got a picture of it. It's in my phone. It's the very first day I came home from work. My wife was excited. My daughter was here with us, the one that had helped me so much. Her husband, they're all there. They're all just like, it came. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I remember picking it up and holding it just like this, and them taking a picture of me. And seriously, I think I almost like, my eyes got misty thinking, wow, it's really now a book.
Yeah. Okay, those, are there any other questions? Valerie, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I actually put it in the chat, but I was wondering about those books that you said that you read about writing to help you get better.
Oh, Valerie, that is such a good question. So she didn't, my professional New York author didn't give me the one that I liked the best. She gave me the one that E.B. White helped. It's Strauss, and I think it's called On Writing. Oh, Strunk. It's Strunk. Thank you. Strunk. What is his is really good. That one's really good. It's super, for all of you students, skinny. It's super skinny, students, and it's a great book on writing. It's super small. It's like a Bible of writing. So you really want to have that one. But the one that I found the most helpful, and I'm going to say this to you students, and it's got some profanity. You're not going to find one swear word in my middle school book, but the book that was so good. It's like, I have read it, Valerie, like a half a dozen times, and I'm reading it again, prepping me from, really diving into my second book, as I've kind of like laying it out. To me, it is the best. And it's Stephen King's On Writing. Yeah. Have you read it, Valerie?
I'm actually in the middle of reading that one right now.
I find it just so cool. And I'm not a Stephen King fan. I like books that are a lot more light than dark. That's just me. But man, he is an amazing writer, and he does such a genuine job. I feel his heart just opening up to us writers. All of you students that are there, get permission from your parents, though. Don't tell your parents that, because it does have a few pretty strong words. But man, his heart just goes out to writers, really, really trying to help us to be able to do what he does so well.
The thing that I like too about his book is that he spends so much time talking about how much he struggled to get that first publishing thing happening.
I know, and he cries. He talks about when he gets that contract and just so overwhelmed. I know, it's cool.
What was that other book? What was that skinny book?
It's E.B. White.
E.B. Strunk?
Well, Strunk does it. E.B. White wrote Charlotte's Web, and E.B. White had been one of Strunk's students in Cornell. When he was going to college, E.B. White, the one that writes Charlotte's Web, you guys have all, Charlotte's Web, you all know Charlotte's Web, right? Yeah. E.B. White is the one that writes Charlotte's Web, and E.B. White endorses Strunk. It's Professor Strunk. It's his professor saying what a great book this is, and he helps promote it. But so the two of them write this book, and Tanya's going to get it so that we can get the title. But you kids would love, I keep saying that, you students would love that book because it's so small, it's so simple. And Stephen King's book, he cites that more than any other book. Like Stephen King uses it like a Bible as well when it comes to writing. And guys, a lot of you might be like me, where like Stephen King is not your thing. You don't like horror and you don't like, some of those different things. But Stephen King can write and describe, and I'm telling you, he can take you and put you in a spot and you feel like you are wherever he's describing. So he's a really good writer. And this is the book. Tanya's got it here at the store. Come to the book bungalow and you get a great book.
It's called Strunk and White, The Elements of Style.
Show them how skinny it is.
It's got only, well, it's 100 pages, but it's just super skinny.
Little tiny book, and it's a fun one. You guys, I mean, I shouldn't say it's a fun one because it's it's about writing. But it'll help you guys a ton to become better writers. You want to just have that and read that so you can become better writers.
Yeah, it's particularly good for beginning writers. Yeah.
That's the one the New York editor sent me saying, you know what, Jeff, you better read this before you try to, you're going to rewrite this. And I did. I had to completely rewrite it that time and then 2 more times before I got to something that I think now the middle school students like.
Are there any other questions? Well, if not, I will, he already told you about the contest, and I think I mentioned that you'll be able to buy discounted autographed copies
I have them right here.
here at the store. As well, there'll be free bookmarks
Yep.
as well.
And it has also a flyer that talks more about that essay contest. But again, you can go online to the website. It's the Jeffery J. McKenna website, and Jeffrey's ERY, but Jeffery J. McKenna website, and it talks about how you can do the essay contest.
Yeah, I'll send you, your teacher will have a link to that if she already has it. Okay, so I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining us, talk about your new book. And thanks to those of you who posed questions. Remember, you can order it through our website, or you can come into the store and get a discounted autographed copy. And I'll be sending links. I didn't put them in the chat box. I didn't have time because we're sharing the screen, but I'll be sending you the links in my follow-up email to the YouTube recording and to his website and to ordering it online through our store. But once again, thanks, Jeff.
No, thank you, Tanya, and thanks to all you students. I'm just so happy for you to get to be in that creative writing class.
And stay safe and stay well. We'll see ya.